Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, Jon Chee. In our last episode, we spoke with Kate about her upbringing as the youngest of 6, her passion for biochemistry, and the serendipitous path that led from her PhD in immunology to a career in patent law. If you missed it, be sure to go back and listen to part 1. In part 2, we continue our conversation with Kate as she shares her experiences navigating law school while working full-time and the challenges scientists face transitioning into the legal profession. We'll also discuss her firm's collaborative culture, built on a foundation of former scientists, and how that fosters innovative approaches to cases in life sciences and emerging technologies. From embracing ambiguity to the dynamic nature of intellectual property law, Kate provides valuable insights into thriving at the intersection of science and law.
And so you start out kind of there, and eventually, to be a lawyer, you have to go to law school. At what point in time where you're like, okay, I need to go get the JD to, kind of continue at this path and expand my purview of this type of work?
Yeah. So then once I think I was working here for about a year and a half. That's kind of how we operate. People say, all right, now you can take the patent bar, and you take the patent bar. That's basically studying all things patent law, all the rules about patent law, and then litigation priority, all these crazy terms. And so once you pass the patent bar, either you can stay a patent agent because you can go back and forth with the patent office just as easily as a lawyer. Like, you don't need to be a lawyer to go back and forth with the U.S. Patent Office. But you kind of look around and you're like, well, eventually I, as a patent agent, would be doing the same thing as a lawyer for the most part, but not getting paid as much.
Yep.
And then you can't be a partner in the firm. So then you're not part of the business, and you're just not just a patent agent, because people are, it's a very important position, but you just don't necessarily reap the benefits, or, sometimes it's not benefits of being a partner in a firm. So I figured, it's like, well, if I'm going to be, now that I'm committed to this, right, I'm a patent agent, I'm not going anywhere, I might as well just go back to law school. And then I decided, it's like, well, I better do it now, because I was out of school. I'd probably finished grad school, and then about 2 years later started law school. It's like, I better do it now, because if I don't do it now, I'm not going to go back, right? It's strike the iron while it's hot. So it's like, I was like, I'm already over taking exams, but I can suck it up for a little while.
Yeah. Like, I have a little bit of momentum still. Like, I can just keep this going, and then but the end will be in sight. And so while you were in law school, were you also working?
I was, and it's a great support system here. And I think in a lot of different especially boutique IP law firms, a lot of people do come out of a lab and then become a patent agent. And so there's kind of a culture of going to school at night. So I would work, full-time during the day, might have to cut out early and then go to class at night, and, take, especially at the beginning, you're taking like civil procedure or torts law, and it's like nothing remotely related to what you did all day. But sometimes that's good. It was nothing remotely related to what I did all day, and so it was different and interesting. And there's always good stories, even from the 1850s, some case law that's still good today from the 1850s. You're like, really? This is what our system is based on?
Yeah, like, come on, what? It's like, it's been some time.
There's been some time, but this is still good law.
Yeah.
And so, and another 2 people I had started with at the time were also in law school. And so we would go over together, and that's just kind of what was expected of us. And the partners here understood if it was finals week, like, you could take the week off. And you're like, oh, you're on vacation. You're like, not quite.
Not really. But there's a lot of reading taking place right now.
Yes.
It's interesting when you brought up tort. So I studied toxicology, That was my focus. So that's like the first thing is like torch. Like that's
Yeah.
like you go like what, and I was like, it was like not really my cup of tea. But it was kind of this first thing where I was just like, yeah, that makes logical sense. That's like that was what I did at the bench.
Yeah.
And I was actually contemplating going the IP route. IP strategy was like really fascinating. Is really fascinating to me. And just being in the Bay Area is kind of something that, like, for family friends, kind of like being in the tech industry, they talk about how the importance of it, obviously protecting your IP, especially when a lot of companies is just like these like that is the bedrock, especially in life sciences.
Yeah.
Software, not a little bit harder, not so much, but especially in the life sciences and being around that is kind of like pivotal. And I guess, one last question on your like law school experience for anyone who's on a similar path as you, who is like a scientist and is considering, going into patent law and going to law school. What are some just like practical key considerations before you's like, yep, we're going, or maybe common pitfalls to avoid, as they're kind of thinking about it?
Yeah, I think the biggest shock coming from a lab, or even though I had worked at a law firm, like just getting into law school, there's no right answer. And I think that's very hard for scientists to not constantly be searching for an answer. Like, people can go down rabbit holes and keep looking and looking. And for a lot of law, there's just no answer. There's, side A and side B. Each side could be right. Who is more persuasive? And so I think you have to learn at some point that you could keep arguing or agree to disagree, but at some point there really are no answers, and you just have to make your argument and be like, that's my argument, and I'm done. I can't keep going, right? There's no scientific proof. Like in grad school, you're like, okay, I answered this question, and there may be new questions, but you feel like you've put that first question to bed. You're like, this is established now, and I'm moving on. And I think in law that even if you think something is settled, somebody looks at the word and you're like, does that mean what it really means? You're like, oh
God, not again.
We already talk about this?
Not again.
You're like, what does is mean? Like, we are really debating the word is, but then you're like, you know what? Sometimes that word is really important. So it's getting into different minutia and figuring out what you're comfortable with. And then, and then going into law school is different because in science, you always had people that they want to hear themselves and they have the answers, and, they want to be heard, which is fine. And law school is similar. You're going to have students and people that are always going to be out and want to get their voices heard. So I was always, again, back the observer, and it's like, you can say things, but I'll just wait my turn and come in with stuff. But, you talked about the reading. And I think as a scientist, you read a lot, right? You're going to read a lot of papers and always going through the literature. And people warned me, here, it's going to be a lot of reading. I was like, no amount of warning you can really prepare you for how much reading that there really is. And I was like, wow.
I was thinking about it because I was like considering going to Berkeley Law, and the first piece of reading is like Nietzsche, and I was like, oh, this is a different this is not just like a nature paper. This is like heavy, like reading.
I can't skim and look at the figures and figure out what they're talking about.
Just like quickly, I got it. This is like, oh, I need to be locked in. Like, and I love that, exactly what you said about how, and it resonates with me, how like with science it can feel super objective and like almost binary at times, like you're right, wrong, got it. Like, but when it comes to law, there's a lot more like gradient, and you kind of have to get comfortable with like living in this like kind of gradient of right, wrong. It's almost like you're thinking in like probabilities almost a lot of the time. And I think what really for me drove that home was like part of like my journey, almost going to law school, that really drove it home for me was like when we did a bioethics and moral philosophy like module.
Mhm.
And that was also tied to like criminal law and that type of stuff. But just like seeing like the arguments that are laid out, and you can just like both sides are like, oh, holy moly, like I can see both sides, both have like their merits. And the first times, like, it didn't sit well with me. I was just like,
Yeah.
oh God, like
Right.
this is giving me great anxiety. But I think business is like that too. Like there's
Mhm.
never like a perfect answer.
Right.
But you have to make an answer. You can't just like
Right.
just sit there and just be like,
Right.
well, you get paralysis, and then that's like when everything goes
Yeah.
wrong.
Right.
Um,
You're like, what's 75% more likely to happen? You're like, all right, that's what we're gonna do. You're like,
Yeah.
is there a risk? Sure.
yeah,
But
exactly.
we'll
And
see.
I think that's exactly it. It's just like understanding like that there will always be a risk that you're ultimately going to take. Just like, what risks are you comfortable taking?
Right. Yeah.
Like, what is your tolerance here? And then, that goes into like investing too and stuff like that. Just like, what is your risk profile? Like, you can fly, like, just like go rogue and just like go full risk on, or you can go like, and I think about that in just like entrepreneurship too. It's like, what is the amount of risk that is right for you as like a
Mhm.
founder? If you want to have a more kind of like less volatile kind of business model, and that if that works for you, that's what you should be doing. Like, you should not
Right.
be on a rocket ship if you're looking for something that's more steady Eddy.
Right.
But I'm getting distracted now.
It
So
happens.
you're now, you're completing your law school. You're now at the law firm, and you mentioned being at the law firm for right out of law school and up until now. Can you just
Mhm.
talk a little bit about the firm itself, and what what is it that got you fired up to spend your whole career here? Like the mission and values of the firm, and to talk a little bit about what makes the firm special.
Sure. I was like, this is one where I could go on for hours.
Yeah.
It's really is a great place to work. When I first interviewed here, um, I was interviewing with the partners at that time, and all former scientists, all just kind of still had a little bit of the lab mentality, right? Maybe a little bit more relaxed than some other law firms might be, from what I've heard.
Yeah.
So, it's a little bit different, and everyone here was very open, and we use the term collegial, but it's very collegial here. There's not a lot of competition. It's for the firm and for our clients. We're trying to do the best work. We're not trying to compete with each other. But we're here for other people, not ourselves. And then just, over the course of 20 plus years that I've been here, right? My background might be in immunology, but I started working on Alzheimer's disease and some VEGF proteins and stuff I knew nothing about. And I think that's one of the reasons I didn't want to be in a lab anymore, is like there's so much other stuff out there that I don't want to get put into this like tiny little, I'm an expert in this tiny little thing. Like now I'm an expert in nothing, but I dabble in a lot.
Yeah.
I dabble in a lot of things.
Yeah.
So working here, you get to see so many different aspects of science that I don't think I would have seen otherwise. And it just has kept it interesting. Either it can come in for my client, or another person might have a client and say, hey, does someone have time to work on this? Or this is not my area. Is anybody an immunologist? So I do a lot of antibody work, but it's not all that I do. I do nanoparticles. I do so many different things that not one day is the same as the next, because you don't know what kind of problems you're going to face in whatever technology might be coming up. So I think just the span and expanse of work that you can get. And then in addition, so it's not just, we're an IP boutique, so we have a lot of life science and chemical people, but we also, there's so much AI stuff going on that we have discussions about AI and how does it impact our life sciences clients, because it's coming. It's
Yeah.
coming if it's not already there to you. And so it's good for us to know about that. And I can walk down the hall and ask my colleague explain AI to me. Like
Yeah.
back when blockchain was really big and Bitcoin, we had to have our software people explain. I was like, someone sit down and explain this to me. So either I don't make any bad investment choices and invest in Bitcoin,
Yeah.
or just so I know what I'm talking about. So it's so nice to be able to have that other aspect here as well. You can go talk about different technologies, and everyone here started off as a scientist in some fashion. So our engineers, a lot of them worked at different companies before they came here, or, you know, they were at least electrical engineers by undergrad and then went to school. So I think it's a unique place in that everybody, for the most part, has some sort of science background or is science associated. You know, even our trademark people, for better or worse, they have to learn some of the science terms, right? Because we do trademarks for drugs. And so they have to learn what this drug does and be able to talk about it and put it on the statements that they submit to the trademark office. So everybody has to dabble a little bit. And I think it's just a unique environment.
Absolutely. It sounds like it. I mean, just what stood out to me earlier too, and again now, is it is a testament to a firm if you spend your whole career there. Like it truly is. And I think I know in the Bay Area, it's common to see, people moving firm to firm to firm to firm. And that is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just another way to, progress your career. But I also think there's like it's incredibly telling when someone can spend their whole career at a firm. It sounds like a place that I would want to be at. It's like, and surround myself. I mean, I was the same way. It was like, when I look back on my bench experience, I was like, I'm glad I did it, but I think I can be like a force multiplier to like support y'all. And,
Right.
like, I'll be in that support role, and that's totally cool. There are definitely way smarter people and at the bench than me. But if I can support your efforts, like I would, that's where I feel myself fitting in. And I think it's, you mentioned not being like necessarily the deepest expert on any one given topic, but I think there's like something incredibly valuable to having a breadth of knowledge. It's like, because you can learn you can cross apply learnings.
Mhm.
And if you only like put the blinders on and focus on one thing, you might miss, some other learning in another discipline that could definitely be relevant to whatever you're looking at right now, right in front of you. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, don't sell yourself short. You also
Thanks,
might
Jon.
you might also be an expert in multiple things. Like I think that's possible too, where you're like, I'm very good
Yes.
actually in a ton of stuff. But I find myself in like, for example, I find myself in Exeter today, the way that we approach like marketing. I was always in the music scene and food and hospitality, and we get great, inspiration, like inspo and just learnings from how they conduct themselves and bring it over here. And I know those sound super disparate, but it just works. Like, I don't know why, it just works.
Yeah.
And so I guess for anyone out there who's listening, it's like, be open to these experiences, and just like learn and see if you can like cross apply.
Agreed. I was about to say, you just got to be open to new suggestions and not kind of say, no, that won't work for us, and be, how could we maybe not all of it's going to work for us, but is there a part of it that's going to work for us? And agreed, there are some times when I've been working on something and then I pick up like another subject and it's not necessarily related. You're like, oh, maybe that thing that I just did for that case can work here. And then you can call up the client. And I think the other thing that's appreciated, and I think we might get to this later, is like at your clients, they're also scientists. A lot of them in-house were scientists, and then you have to talk to inventors and you have to sound intelligent, like what you're talking about. And so, the science background and techniques have moved on. I don't know all of the techniques now, but I have to learn them, and it's it's fascinating. We're like, oh, you can do this. And half the time that it took me to do it now with, these new tabletop machines that I didn't have.
It's exactly it. And I think it's like having that, it's just like curiosity. And just like, in order to stay like with how quickly these things are moving, you kind of have to be like flexible in that way in your thinking, or you're going to get left like in the dust. There's like, you frankly just won't. And you bring up AI too, just like that's moving at a pace. I'm just like, what the heck? Like, what is going on? I've never seen like something move so quickly and just with such intensity. And I'm more observing. I'm not like necessarily participating, but it is quite something to see.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Kate Neville. Tune in for part 3 of our conversation to learn more about her journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again on the Biotech Startups podcast for part 3 of Kate's story. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.